Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I hope your questions will be answered during this time with Ken. Just so you know, so we've been doing this information session for 3 years now. This is going to be our 3rd year. And we've had it with Ken live at the Pinecrest Center. And it's always been very informative. We've gotten great questions and great answers. So I'm hoping that today too, your questions will be answered and that you'll leave satisfied. I'll pass it on to Ken and his team, and he'll also explain to you the question and answer format. This is our first time doing a webinar, so I can't see anybody. It's very strange for me. I can't see anybody, but I can see that we have 21 people, which is amazing. When we do this live, we usually tend to have about 14 or 16 people. So it's really nice to see. So Ken, I'll pass it on to you and you can introduce yourself and then we can get started. Thank you so much.
And Lillian, the trick to it, because you get no feedback at first, right? So what you do is you get something like an Energizer bunny or something, and you put it on top of your webcam. I use a Lewis Chessman, and it's a bit disorienting, at first, but then of course it's good that people ask questions because you can see that somebody is actually out there asking questions. So briefly, my law practice is a provincial and interprovincial practice that specializes in working with families that have kids with special needs. It's mostly estate planning, wills, trusts, Henson trust, disability and caregiver tax credits, legal guardianship, ODSP applications, ODSP appeals. What else do we do? And of course, all the normal things, probate applications, trust setup, all of those things. So we're happy to answer any questions you might have as best we can tonight. I'll just start the presentation. You'll see the kind of material that we'll cover. Ask what questions you can. Karen will try to answer as many as she can. And the questions that don't get answered, if you send an email to Karen at kpopelaw.ca, which you'll see at the end, then we'll try to deal with them after the fact. So this is the presentation sort of cover, and I'd like to give some perspective to the whole thing. Everybody, obviously thinks that they're sort of crazy and alone and dealing with all their own situations and their children's situations. So as it turns out, 1 family in 10 is a parent and perhaps a sibling household of a person with special needs. If you look at the population of the province, last time I looked, it was 13.7 million. But StatsCan says that if you divide that by 3, it'll tell you how many households, which intuitively makes sense. So if you've got 13.7 million divided by 3, you have 4,566,000 households. And this chart shows that there are a total of 378,802 people receiving disability benefits, ODSP benefits. And this doesn't include, just for reference, it might include some people on CPP disability who also get a portion of ODSP. That is true, but it doesn't include workman's comp or long-term disability or any of those things, anything other than ODSP. So obviously the total number is greater, and it doesn't include the kids under 18, except to the extent that you can see here. Oh, it's on the next slide. I'll get to that. You can see that there are children under 18 with special needs who are not included in these numbers because they're not 18 yet. And it also doesn't include all the people who are 65 and older who migrate off of ODSP and onto old age security and guaranteed income supplements, which is about 1/3 more. So you can see here that if you've got 378,000 people who are receiving ODSP benefits. And if you have 4,556,000, this isn't quite a tenth. You can see that, right? That would have to be 3,788,000. But if you include the kids under 18 and the seniors over 16, that's another third, roughly. So you have like another 400,000 that aren't in these numbers, and that makes it that makes it 1 in 10 households. And then if you look at the fact that there's also a sibling household, you know, these days it's more likely just one sibling, but you know, I'm the eldest of 5, right? And we're still the biggest demographic. So you can see that 1 in 10 is a conservative estimate. Now, if this is the case, why don't we get more attention? Interesting, eh? I mean, in Ottawa here, we have Corso Italia, Preston Street, right? And it's, you know, named after Italy, or Italians. And there's, you know, there's, why, if we have so many families, in Ottawa, for example, here's the breakdown, and I'm not quite sure where autism fits into this. But here's the breakdown by type of disability. You'll get all these by email. And then if you look at the numbers, where's Ottawa? It's here someplace close by. There we go. So Ottawa has 25,496 people on ODSP. They have 34,805 in their benefit unit. And there's 2,024 that are kids under 18 whose parents have a low household income. And so they receive assistance for children with severe disabilities, which doesn't really mean the severity. It's just that the income household is low and there's a kid with disabilities. But you can see here that if you have a population of 1 million in Ottawa, and if that's roughly 333,000 households, then if you take the 25,496 and gross it up by all the kids under 18 and the seniors, you're easily going to come to 333,000, which is 10%. And it's phenomenal. I mean, why isn't there a Down syndrome drive? Right? Autism way. Now, what we do is a variety of things: wills, Henson trusts, tax credit recaptures. And one of the things that we do, we try first, is to try to put money into people's pockets. So if a child is over 18 and at home, which most of them of that age group are, and here's the numbers, you can see that the borders is 48,233 of the total of 378,000. That's about roughly 13%. So you can see that roughly 13% are at home with parents because they're 18. And they're all slotted into room and board, which is $896. So what we do typically is we try to break them out of the $896 into the shelter plus supplementary benefits of $1169. And the way we do that is we do a lease type document between the parent and the child, providing that the child will pay shelter costs to the parent, shared shelter costs of we say $550, so that you don't have to try to change it every time there's a $2 increase in the shelter component. The shelter component of the $1169 is $497, and we've done this hundreds of times. What happens is the people listen to these seminars, and we discuss, as we will further in a moment, how this works and how it could be changed, and then they try sometimes, occasionally, themselves. But the problem is that ODSP really doesn't want to get the word out. They're really, really, really not inclined to assist families to get the benefit increase, because they don't want it to be spread that families can do this themselves or that it can be done, period. They're not that averse to letting my clients slide through. So, you know, along with the letterhead and the explanation and the lease document and so on, when we deal with this across the province, we usually succeed. You know, we have a few situations where we explain to the client that this isn't worth pursuing. It's just not possible. And what it comes down to on the one level is, can the child shop and cook? So we walk through this scenario, we have a discussion. You know, if you were to take your child to the grocery store with a shopping list, could they fill the cart? Would the list have to be a picture list? So then they get to the checkout. Can they pay with a tap card or with a PIN card? Well, yes, they can, because that's how they use their iPad. And then you're with them. They don't have to carry this stuff home by themselves. So you drive home. Do they know what to put in the freezer versus the cupboard? Oh yeah, oh sure, yeah, no problem at all. Well, can they shop? Can they cook? And yes, it's true. They, you know, parents many times haven't trained the kids to cook. Right? It's just simpler for mom to make the meals, which is like any family, right? And they're a little leery about the kid using a gas stove, sure. But they can certainly use a toaster oven, they can use a microwave. And they don't have to do this themselves all the time, just when they like, you know. And of course, it's a good thing for the child to learn if they haven't learned it. Lots of kids learn life skills at school, but lots don't. And it's a good thing for the child to be able to make their own breakfast, maybe make sandwiches, heat up something at the very least. So what we do, that's the process. And the quote unquote rent is just a shared shelter cost. So it's not taxable rental income to the parent. You don't have to pay tax on it. So that's how that works. And then what we do is we look at the disability and caregiver tax credits. And the disability tax credit, as you probably know, depends on whether the child is markedly restricted or takes substantially longer, or can't set and keep goals, or needs constant supervision. It has to be reasonably severe and continuous, but it's something that we often can sort out. And the typical profile of the family that we assist with this is either a family that didn't know about it, or did know and somebody convinced them that it wouldn't apply to them, like their doctor, or that they did use it, and then when the child went into supported living, they stopped because they thought the child had to live with the parent, which is not true. So our most common profile is a full 10-year recovery on this. And a 10-year recovery recaptures for an adult child, for the parent, but you know, dealing with an adult child, about $16,000. And as you'll see as we proceed, it then allows the child to have a registered disability savings plan. And you can see here that if you put in $1,500 a year when the child is, so let's say over 18, the government puts in $4,500 for 20 years. And it's invested, so of course it grows. And I won't go further into that just at this point, but you can see this is substantial. And then as far as the caregiver tax credit, once the child is 18, if the child is living at home, firstly, the parents can certainly use this caregiver credit. And then since 2017, if the child is not living at home, you can still use it. And it reduces taxes at present by about $1,000 a year. So Karen, would you speak to Christiane tomorrow? Have her change the 7 to 8, okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So the recapture is about 8,000. It used to be 600 a year, and now it's 1,000. But it's great, you know, in a few years, 2022, it will be 1,000 a year for all of the 10 years. Now, of course, the child would have to be 28 because it doesn't kick in until they're 18. But you can see that this is substantial. And it goes on to save the parent roughly $1,600 a year plus 1,000 going forward. And the great thing about that is that what you need to contribute to the RDSP each year is $1,500. So the disability tax credit is saving you $1,600 plus 1,000, and all of a sudden the RDSP is self-funded. Now, to receive ODSP, the simplest test is that you can't function in a competitive workplace. That doesn't mean you can't work. Work is good, work is social. And what happens is, and we'll get into this, I think, further, but the child can work, and if we have successfully raised their benefits to $11.69, and they work, well, then they get an additional 100, and the first 200 is exempt from any offset. So the child only has to make 100 or 200 a month to get the extra 100. And then after that, for every dollar that they make, they lose 50 cents. But this is still a very, very good thing. Just to bring you up to speed, September 1st, 2017, the gifting rule, the voluntary payment rule, went from 6,000 over 12 months to 10,000 over 12 months. Now this really only applies to trackable, traceable payments that happen to go into the child's account. Of course, if you give cash to the kid, then there's no way to track that. But if it was a traceable, trackable system, then it's 10,000 over 12 months. The asset test went from 5,000 to 40,000 because we used to, it was comical. We used to have a problem because the old asset test was 5,000, but the gift rule was 6,000 over 12. So the child could receive 6, but they could only keep 5. And I think this is probably the newest thing. As of September 27th, if you are a caregiver for someone who can't go to school, can't take part in their routine activities, or support workers can't come in because of COVID, then the caregiver benefit will pay $500 a week for up to 26 weeks to that caregiver, the parent, but only if they were working in the last 2 years. If they made employment income of 5,000 at least in 2019 or 2020. This doesn't fit for all the caregivers who have always been caregivers and didn't work. How are we doing on questions? I have a RDSP for my son. I'm wondering how and when to withdraw the funds. Well, you have to continue to contribute basically for 20 years or until he's 49. Then you have to wait 10 more years for all the grants and bonds to be vested. We need to modify our home. Can't do that with this money. Child is 10. Shortened lifespan. Well, this is a judicious question. Like, for example, if you have a daughter with Rett syndrome and she has a shortened lifespan, you may want to cease all contributions at a certain point so that the 10-year vesting period starts to run.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Ken?
Yeah. Go ahead.
You're on mute,
Sorry. Sorry, I had read that if the person does have a shortened lifespan, they can get a medical note and it gets changed to specific disability savings plan.
That's true.
Do you want to, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit for that family that asked the question?
That is true. If you can get a doctor's note that the child is likely to live 5 years or less, well, then the rules do change. That's correct. But if you don't know, it's just an expectation, then what you might do is contribute for 5 years, get the grants and bonds for 5 years, and then cease all of that and wait for the time to pass to see if it all vests. But you're right, there is a 5-year exception. If your child is able to cook and shop and they're getting $8.96, can they ask? Well, you can ask. The problem is just a practical problem because they don't like to let parents access this. They stonewall the parents and they mislead them. Oh, well, yes, you can do that if your child has a self-contained dwelling unit. Oh, well, he does. Yes, we fitted up the basement. He's got a bathroom and a kitchen and all that. Oh, did you tell the city about that? Well, of course, you don't have to because he's a family member, right? Oh, well, if you show us that you're declaring the rental income, then we'll do this. But of course, that's contrary to the whole purpose, right? Or more simplistically, what they do is parents trying it themselves. It's kind of like one of these situations where if you have a lawyer, the lawyer or the official on the other side has to talk to the lawyer, not you. But otherwise, what they do is they firstly try to talk to the child or the mom. And we warn them, of course, and we tell them what to say, like have them call us. Say, Mr. Pope is handling this whole matter. Give Mr. Pope a call. This is his number. This is his extension. Because what they do is they try to get the mom to agree that she makes the food, which she does. But that's not the point. The point is, when they wish to, could the child make their own food, and do they from time to time? Because in a family, you eat together. I mean, what 18-year-old boy makes his own food except craft dinner or heating something up or ordering in, right? Right? There's no monopoly on this. But what they do is they try, and then once they get the answer that they want, they write it into the file, and then I can't fix it. So it's that credibility level of the letterhead and the story and the lease and all that. That's what it comes down to. Let's see. In regards to the 1,500, 4,500, is it a fixed set amount or can I contribute more? And then the government will increase. No, it's the optimum amount is 1,500 to get 4,500. Both these numbers don't capture those disabled children who have families that do not qualify for ACSD. Therefore, this number would be even higher. Yes. Yes. Okay, let's get on with the next one. So getting approved for the disability tax credit. So the qualification for the disability tax credit is a much higher test than ODSP. We'll come to that as well. But the simplistic test for a child with disabilities or special needs to get ODSP is initially that they can't function in a competitive workplace. If they're much more restricted, then of course they will clearly qualify. But if it comes down to, what is the simplest first test, it's functioning in a competitive workplace. But for the disability tax credit, which is federal, it's a matter of being markedly restricted, taking substantially longer, not being able to set and keep goals, needing constant supervision. So that's the higher test. And then you can see here that says here $20,000. What that is related to the child credit. And Karen will have to tidy that up as well. What that is for a child, if there was a 10-year period recapture, the annual recapture is about $2,200 per child. So for 10 years, it's $22,000. But most of these scenarios, most of the files that we have are not for minors. They're not for infants. Most of those cases, the child has been approved, you know, like with autism, they've been approved since age 4, this kind of thing. Most of the files that we work on, as I say, are situations where the child has gone into supported living and the parent quit, or they just didn't know about it. The wonderful thing as well, it's a lot of fun actually, is if the child is under 18, then they may, if the household income is less than say 75,000, they may get a child benefit, Canada Child Benefit. Lots of people get that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they're approved for the disability tax credit, they also stand to get the Canada Disability Child Benefit. Now, this is only for kids under 18, but it's a maximum of $2,400 a year, and it's household income tested up to $150,000, whereas the Canada Child Benefit is tested up to $75,000. So what you wind up with is situations where the household income is greater than $75,000. You can see that that could happen, right? So they apply or don't apply because they know they won't qualify for the Canada Child Benefit. And then we get the disability tax credit approved, and all of a sudden, up to $150,000, they qualify for the Canada Disability Child Benefit.
Mm.
Now, it wouldn't be the full $2,400, but you don't get the Canada Disability Child Benefit unless you have applied for the Canada Child Benefit, which you don't get. So there's a bit of machination around this to make sure that you can make this work.
Ken, before you move on to the next one, can I just also mention in regards to the disability tax credit, just in case people don't know, some of them have expiry dates. So please be aware and know of your expiry date. CRA normally will not send you a letter to let you know that it's expiring. So it is up to us to be aware of when it is going to expire and then to reapply.
That's right. And I don't get it, you know, I mean, we've seen these situations where someone is approved where the child has Down syndrome, but they're only approved for 5 years, or or the child has, you know, severe autism and they're approved to age 18.
Yeah.
And you have to bear in mind, you have to laugh a little bit, otherwise it becomes rather cynical. But these are clearly being dealt with by somebody at CRA who doesn't have a child with special needs, right? I mean, yeah, you see what I mean. Now, if the child's over 18, the caregiver credit will kick in. It's rarely used. So a lot of our work is dealing with the caregiver credit. And until 2017, caregiver credit was dependent on the child residing with you, but then they removed the reside with criteria. So like with this, lots of people whose child doesn't live with them. And the part that I like is this. Look at this sec here. Look at these numbers here. You see, until 2017, the only parents, the only siblings who could use the caregiver credit were the 48,000 whose kids lived with them. Whereas there's 378,000, 100,000 on ODSP, but only 48,000, roughly 13%, could use the caregiver credit. But when they changed it in 2017, in almost all cases, I think, you know, there are some cases where the parents have no involvement with the kids, that's true. But I think that as of 2017, almost all of the 378,000 people who are all by definition over 18, their parents would qualify for the caregiver credit. This is a big thing because these guys get $1,000 a year, 48,000 get $1,000 a year. If they're, you know, if they know to use this credit, which we work on a daily basis. But meanwhile, now since 2017, it's probably 378,000 times 1,000. So what you do is you stick 1,000 right on here. You add 3 zeros. That's a big number, which I think is great. So we'll come to this in a second. So Joanne and Bert, is that Canada Child Disability Benefit factored before tax of 150K combined income or after tax? It's just income. Look at line 260. Because you're right, you know, if a person makes 150 grand, they only take home 100, right? But that's not how it works. Okay, so approval of the disability tax credit means that an RDSP can be opened. And you can see here that even if you don't contribute, the government will put in 1,000 a year in bonds. And then if you contribute 1,500, there's a further 3,500 grant. I'd take that. And you can also get this retroactively. There's a formula for it. But over a 5-year period, if you contribute between roughly 3,500 and 5,000 a year, what you do is you get the basic credit, the basic grants and bonds for that 5-year period, plus you pick up to 10 before. And of course, if we're able to recapture $16,000 plus perhaps $8,000, then this becomes feasible. Otherwise, if the child is young, 22, then you simply contribute for 20 years going forward. You'll get all the grants and bonds. But if you had the money to make the retroactive contributions, what you would do for a 5-year period is you'd put in the optimal amount, which varies for the 5-year period, but you make the contributions each year and the child gets his grants, or sorry, his bonds regardless, but he gets a maximum grant of 10,500. So you can, quickly pick this up. I think you can read this as well as I could say it. And you'll get all these slides after the show. Now, what this does is it discusses guardianship, powers of attorney, substitute decision makers, trustees. The first distinction is that the trustee of the Henson Trust in the will manages the trust asset. They don't manage the assets of the child. Now, if the child is competent, they should sign powers of attorney. So if your child is over 18, you should have a power of attorney for property and for personal care, because otherwise, inevitably, certain personal care information will not be given to you because they're an adult and there's privacy legislation. So you need powers of attorney for personal care, even though if the child is not competent, which of course, if they're not competent, they can't sign a power of attorney, but they are the statutory decision makers, substitute decision makers by statute. But the problem we face is that the fact that you are the substitute decision maker of an adult child who's not competent, it means that you have the right to certain information. It just doesn't mean that you have the clout, the leverage to get it. Because doctors and hospitals tend to think that they know what's best. And they also deal with our children, with kids with disabilities, and our senior parents, the old people like me, with the triage system. So what you do is you put people in one of 3 boxes. Can't fix them. Probably we can fix them. And yeah, we can fix them. So what happens is the people that you can fix, they fix. The people that they might be able to fix, they might fix. And the people they really can't fix, well, they're broken bicycles. You know, why pump air into the tire of a broken bicycle? And, you know, from a medical triage perspective, I guess it makes sense, but I don't think it makes sense to me much. It doesn't make any sense to you at all in the context of your child.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do in a lot of cases, for various reasons, and I'll touch on that, but is we apply for legal guardianship. We have the parents and perhaps a sibling, perhaps an aunt and uncle, appointed as the legal guardian of the child. Now they have to be not competent. You have to be assessed and found not competent. You can't just become the guardian of somebody who is competent but makes the wrong decisions. So we started doing this back in 2009 because at the time you could set up an RDSP if the child was competent, but if the child was not competent, there was nobody who had the legal capacity to set up the RDSP, which you can see is a problem. So, you know, we tooled up and started doing legal guardianship applications. And then what they did within a year or so was they changed things so that the parent can be the account holder on an RDSP, which is fine for now. The problem is that as the parents age, whoever comes after them is not able to be the account holder. So who gives consent to the contributions from the Henson Trust to maximize the RDSP? Who decides what kind of LDAP payout procedure there is at age 60? Who deals with the payment in the name of the child? Because the checks can only be issued in the name of the beneficiary. Who deals with that? Who applies for old age security and guaranteed income supplements when the kid's 65, which is a demographic that is just cresting right now? Because what happened is, after the Second War, there was a baby boom. And a lot of kids that previously would have died didn't die. Because we had surgical techniques like fixing hearts for kids with Down syndrome that were largely honed by the surgery requirements for the Second War. And all of a sudden, we also all happened to have antibiotics where kids got sick with different things and didn't die. Now, I remember kids in my neighborhood who had polio, who had, fevers and mumps and measles, mostly measles, and they didn't die. But before we had a polio vaccine, and MMR, for measles, people these days talk a whole lot about, oh, gee, if I give my kid a shot, he'll get autism. Well, you know what, I have to tell you, frankly, my son's 20, I'm 68, and he's 20. And I went through that discussion with the pediatrician at the time where everybody's frightened. We're just parents, what the hell do we know? But the world has moved along, and our kids are a whole lot safer now than they used to be. But there's still a lot of baby boom kids who have disabilities who didn't die. They might be blind, they might be deaf, right? But they're not dead. And they're just now starting to turn 65. Well, who's going to handle that application for them? And when they turn 65 and they get OAS, GIS, well, maybe they're in a group home with community living, and community living is getting the 1169, the institutional amount. It's only the parents who get the 896. They're the only ones that get the lesser amount in return for 24/7 care. It's not the institutions, right? They get the full amount, not the parents, right? That's what burns me. But anyway, I'll stop my little rant. So we do a lot of guardianship applications, and it's to handle these things when the parents are gone. And we're having an interesting discussion with with one of the community living groups. And you see, a community living philosophically thinks that somehow guardianship applications take away from the agency of a not competent adult child, and that they think they should just have supported, guided, assisted, hand-over-hand support for their decision-making. Well, we've got a situation now where the child is turning 60, and by the end of the year, somebody has to decide on what kind of LDAP payments that child's going to receive. Well, do you think that child can actually comprehend what's the best LDAP payment for him? You know, how can you possibly let a paid support giver help that child have a supported, guided decision about their money, which could easily be $200,000 or $300,000? How does this impact on what that group is going to charge that kid? They can't be guardians, right? They're not arm's length, they're paid. So we know they can't be legal guardians, but they seem to have this idea that they can, you know, somehow maintain the situation for this child with supported guidance. I think a legal guardian, parent, and sister or brother is a much better choice. You know, there's a real distinction here, you know, because for all the supporting professionals that you get, like myself, and community living, and doctors, we don't have skin in the game. The family does. And the way I explain this in my seminars is that if you look at all the supporting, well-intentioned professionals and the family in the context of an egg and bacon breakfast, well, the chicken's involved, the pig's committed. And we have to have a certain humility about that. We're just here to help. I guess that's my second rant. So anyway.
Can we have some great questions in the chat box?
Sure. What can the RDSP money be used for? Well, if the child is old enough, if the grants and bonds have been vested, then what happens is it's paid out to them either over a 23-year period or at a maximum of 10% of the fund per year. And then whatever you can do with that money, you can do. It's exempt for ODSP purposes. Is there any disadvantage to an RDSP? For example, you don't know the competency or prognosis. Well, there's no downside, because even if you contribute and you get all the grants and bonds, and then the child passes on, say they're in a supported living environment, and then their needs are very modest, and they can't do a will. Well, what happens is they pass on, and by succession law, either their parents, if still alive, receive the money, or if not, then their siblings or the siblings' children, and after that it goes up and over and down to cousins, but there's no downside to it. Families are often told that they don't need to become the legal guardian. Why is that? And how can parents go through the process at affordable costs? Well, you can't go through it at affordable costs. You have to go through it at the cost that it costs. A lot of parents think that because they're the parent, that they are the guardian. Very common misconception, but they're not. You're just the parent. Now, if your child's not competent, you are, by statute, the substitute decision maker for personal care. That is true. So if that's your only issue, your child doesn't have an RDSP. All they have is ODSP, and it's easy enough to be the trustee of that. Well, then perhaps you don't need it. What age should one get guardianship for the child, 18 or at 16? Well, not before 18, because then otherwise you have to do it again at age 18. But at the point where you think that it meets your comfort level, your not staying awake at night level, because when you're gone, then what? And it's the same as for your will with the Henson Trust, basically. When do you need a will with the Henson Trust? Well, is it now? Is it after the first parent is deceased? I do have one client who put it off. She just can't afford it. And so she's going to leave it to her siblings, because then they can pay for it from the Henson Trust when she's gone. But generally, it's a matter of the parent saying, I'm not going to leave this for my kids. They've got enough to do here. But the timing of it is a good question. When do you do it? And that's how we always discuss it. You don't need it right now. You know, you're the ODSP trustee, you're the account holder for the RDSP, you're not having any problems with the doctors, right? You don't need it right now. But for future planning, when would you want to do that? And also, how much does it cost to get a guardianship? Well, it's expensive. It's thousands of dollars for the legal fees. And then, not tens of thousands, but thousands. And then you need 2 capacity assessments. And we say that they'll each cost $1,200. We're generally able to keep that around the $900 each range. Then you need a $229 court filing fee, and you need $250 plus HST for the public guardian to review the application. In total, thousands of dollars. So it's not something we sell. You know, we do them certainly all the time. We got, oh Christ, we got, I don't know, 3 dozen maybe in process right now. The most recent ones that we're doing are for the family managed care funding, because you have to be the legal representative of the child who's over 18, who's not competent, in order to receive the family managed care funding. The release of medical information to the parents, at least the CHEO, is at age 12. Okay. What should I do to keep receiving the information after that? Well, if the child is 16, you should have a power of attorney for personal care, because that's the age of competence, if they're competent, for personal care. That would settle that. So it's 10 to 8. We're doing pretty good here. This is the slide for personal care. You've had time to read it. This is for property. This would deal with ODSP and also for RDSPs. And as well, if you happen to be a teacher, hydro worker, municipal employee, or workplace safety insurance board employee, then your pension, especially like, for example, with a teacher, you could easily have a $60,000 pension. So if you say your spouse has predeceased you, you're a woman, your spouse has predeceased you, he had a pension of some sort, you get part of that. But yours is a statutory provincial pension. So what happens is there's an opportunity here to have 50% of that pension go to your adult dependent survivor child. So this, you know, the power of attorney would allow someone to apply for this for the child, but that's that's otherwise what legal guardianship is about. But we try to be simple. We try to be economical. As long as there's no special issues, as long as powers of attorney for property and personal care can reasonably, even in a gray zone, be signed and be effective, and to have doctors and banks and others, you know, hang their hat on it, we do it. A person is presumed to be competent unless they're found to be not competent. You know, we go with that. We support that. We think that people should be dealt with as adults, competent adults, whenever they can. But when you can't, you can't. This is just a piece about the substitute decision maker. This is only personal care. And it's only if the person is not competent, and there's obviously no power of attorney, and there's no legal guardianship. This is more information about guardianship. I still have 23 attendees, Lillian. So we're doing pretty well. Are there any questions about legal guardianship? This is a slide about the pensions for adult dependent children. When we say children, we mean adult dependent children. And the test is that they're dependent and that they have disabilities. Can you possibly imagine demographically how many teachers and municipal employees and hydro generators, power workers, workman's comp, how many of those people there are that have pensions? And what we know for a fact is that 1 in 10 of them is a household that has a child with special needs. 1 in 10. So what you wind up with, for example, with a teacher's pension, is she's retired, typically a she. She has a $60,000 pension. She has an adult dependent survivor child who has autism. He's at Carey's place in Stouffville. And he's going to get $30,000 a year. So his sister, who is his legal guardian, will apply for the pension and he'll get it. And she'll receive the $30,000 on his behalf because he couldn't. But he's at Carey's place. So how does this shake out? I mean, it's the same shakeout that you'd have when the kid starts OAS GIS. All of a sudden, ODSP doesn't give the institutional amount to community living or Carey's place, wherever it is. So how much do they charge? If you're on OAS GIS and you're getting $18,000, you used to get $14,000. It was paid directly to Carey's place or community living. Now you're getting $18,000 directly paid to the kid. This is the comical part about community living opposing this whole idea of guardianship. What are they going to do? Who's going to apply for this? And who's going to receive the checks in the name of the child? And then how much is community living going to charge? And yet we have, this philosophical ideological resistance, to the idea of legal guardianship. It just makes no sense. And as time goes by, it's going to be very clear to groups and organizations who already ask the parents for legal guardianship or power of attorney if it's feasible. So they've got their head in the sand. So anyway, these pensions are great because if you have a child who's in Carey's place, his needs are modest. He's 55 and mom's 85. So his needs are very modest. So all of a sudden he has an income of $30,000. He pays tax on it, but he has his personal and disability credits of $20,000. So $20,000 is not taxed. $10,000 is taxed at 22%, so $2,200. So let's say 3, just for simplicity. So after tax, he receives, that's not true. He pays 22% on 30. So that's 6,600. On 10. So he's got 30,000 minus 2,200. So about 17, 27. My mind's slipping a gear here. It's getting too late. But the point is that there is some tax, but not much. And he can't use all that money. So what happens is his guardian accumulates it all, pays whatever it is that he has to pay. Let's say $14,000 to Carey's place. Let's say we have to replace the ODSP payments, right? So the rest of it, she gets to accumulate and invest for another 20 years. And then he passes on, and he's not competent to do a will, just like he's not competent to do a will for his RDSP. Now this is a bad example. He's 55, right? But, he could have had one for a few years. So then he dies intestate. And by succession law, she gets it. Yeah, that's a lot of money. That brings us to Henson trusts. This is for the estate left for the child by the parent. So if the client dies, 50% of the estate goes to the Henson trust for the child. It's more than he'll ever need, but it's set up such that whatever his needs are, they're granted, and the rest of it is invested. And the first 20,000 of the income generated, aside from the pension, right? That's a conflicting factor. But if there's no pension, the first $20,000 of it is not taxed. And you can see that if you have a trust of $500,000 invested at 4%, that's $20,000. So unless there's a pension, which isn't going to be in all cases, of course, the first 20,000 is not taxed. So this money accumulates. And then he dies 20 years later. And what's left is distributed pursuant to the clause, the trust residue clause, to typically his sister or her children. We often get a question about, well, yes, but aren't these trusts limited to $100,000, and aren't the disbursements limited to $10,000 over 12 months? The answer to that is no. This is of lifetime benefits trusts are of more limited interest, but if you happen to have someone who has a sizable RIF, her spouse is predeceased, and they have a child with cognitive disabilities, then you can set up this special type of trust to receive that RIF, and it rolls over to the RIF just as it would to a parent or a spouse. And the trustee can only purchase a qualifying trust annuity, which then pays out for the balance of the life, basically, of the beneficiary. But what this means is that instead of having a $500,000 income in the year of the death of the parent, which in a lot of cases, of course, could be taxed at close to 50%, what you have is a situation where the trustee purchases an annuity which makes payments to the trust, but the income is all declared in the hands of the beneficiary. And the beneficiary has roughly $20,000 of tax credits. So the first $20,000 is not taxed, and in many cases, this will mean that there is no tax. And that's your choice. Pay tax or don't pay tax. I think that's a pretty simple situation. What is your opinion on RESP? Should you open a group plan or individual plan? Do programs exist? Well, on November 10th, we're going to have a webcast on exactly this topic. And if you send an email to Karen at Capo Blah, she'll send you the invitation. How is the trust set up? Does the trustee approach a bank? Well, sort of. Basically, neither the trustee knows what they're doing or the bank knows what they're doing. But yes, you do. You set up the account at a trust, bank trust account, and then you set up a trust investment account. Our scope of retainer on these files has a list of things to likely need to be done that goes from A to W. This is some information about lifetime benefits trust. It's 5 after 8, so I'll just show this to you simply. I'll show you this one. This is a simpler one. You can see here that it's a small RIF, but if a person dies in December and they have other income, let's just say $100,000, then they're going to pay roughly 50% tax. Actually, 44% actually, but on the first 50,000. But we've got 275,000 here, so the first 50,000 gets taxed at 44, and the rest gets taxed at 53. So you can see here that you can either pay roughly this amount, 137, or you can buy an annuity for the child based upon their age and using their tax credits. And Karen, this is the other slide I wanted changed. Have the 11,600 changed to 13,229.
Okay.
So you can see here that there's no tax payable. That's the difference. You can either pay this much approximately or nothing. These are just some verbiage pieces. Qualifying disability trust, graduated at rate estates, principal residence exemptions. If a Henson trust buys a property for the child to live in, then it qualifies as a principal residence for that child. So eventually, upon the eventual sale of that property, it's not under the present rules. It's fully capital gains exempt, so there's no tax on it. And this is the last slide. It's 5 after 8. If there's any last questions, please ask them. But this is how you ask any follow-up questions. You can, of course, ask Lillian, and she'll pass them on to me. But otherwise, ask Karen, and we'll do our best to answer the questions. Lillian, do you want to say any closing words?
1 second. Well, let's see if people have questions.
Okay.
I also wanted to add that if you do want to do a consultation with Ken, I believe the first consultation is free. Is that correct, Ken?
Yeah, the first half hour, let's say.
Okay,
You
so
know, we review the family evaluation, and generally speaking, we can point out what would be a good thing for that family to do just to start with, you know.
okay. And then somebody wants to know when the RESP webinar is going to be, please.
It's November 10th at 7 p.m.
Okay, November 10th. So hopefully they got that.
Oh, good. Ah, that's nice. And a couple of kind words, eh? That's nice.
Yes.
Well, I think this went well.
I think so too. It's a lot of information to take in. I know
Yes.
I've been coming for the past 3 years, and every time I'm like, oh, how did I miss that last time? So I'm always picking up something new whenever I come. So thank you. Yeah.
That's how it works. We have slightly over 11,000 people on our subscription list, and what we find is that people take part repeatedly, but that only about a quarter of the 11,000 actually do take part in webcasts. You know, we've started podcasts now to see how many people would rather have a podcast to listen to as they're driving in their car.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very surprised, you know, that only 25% of the 11,000, that's pretty good indication,
Mm-hmm.
are prepared to take part in webcasts.
Right.
Now, whether we need to send out free webcams, I don't know, but maybe that's it.
You never know. We have another question for you.
A child is under 18, passes away, and has an RDSP, and this has happened. Will the grants and bonds be taken away, or can it be rolled into the parent's RRSP? Well, any non-vested grants and bonds are lost. And yes, it is true that you could roll the growth portion, the potential income portion of the RDSP. Well, let me take a step back. The proceeds from the RDSP, whatever they are, minus grants and bonds, whatever it is that there is payable to the beneficiary, the child. So some portion of that could be income to the child. Now, of course, for the most part, they're not going to pay tax. That's part of the whole process, you know, the payments that come eventually at age 60 from the RDSP. Under a normal, simple scenario, roughly 90% of it is income. The 10% that you contribute, perhaps, like if the total amount is 300,000 and you've contributed 30,000, well, then 90% of it is potentially income and 30% is capital. But of course, as it's paid out over time, if it's paid out at a rate of less than 20,000 a year, by definition, well, then you have tax credits to equate all that. But then upon death, there would be a lump sum. So the rolling into the RDSP It's income to the beneficiary, right? I think what you're more thinking about is RDSPs, sorry, RESPs that are collapsed, that you want to either roll the income portion into an RRSP or into the RDSP. And of course, that's quite flexible because if you collapse an RESP, the capital belongs to the parent. The grants are probably lost, and then there is an income portion which could come to the parents, which could be potentially taxable. But you can either do the paperwork to roll it into an RRSP if you have enough contribution room, which most people do, or you simply receive it and contribute it. Now, you don't really have to roll it, but that said, yes, you can, an RESP.
So would you recommend that people when you have your RDSP, should they invest it? Like I know you can put it into a GIC, and so they should try and invest it. Don't just leave it there.
Yeah, and if you happen to have an RDSP with a bank, check what your rate of return is, because of course the banks have a vested interest in you not getting anything. And they don't give you advice on investment. I generally try to get people to switch to a financial advisor of some sort, or at least get an advisor at the bank. Like this is not uncommon. I've seen files where mom comes in to see me. She has set it up in 2008, bang on in December, right when it first came on. And I review the statement, and since inception, she's gotten 0.5%. It's terrible. And I looked at one a couple of years ago. It had $42,000 in it, which at the time was not fully funded. Okay. But in the first 6 months of the year, it had earned $2.47, $42,000, right? So I looked at the statement, and I more or less knew what I was going to find because we've seen it before, but I looked at the statement, and all that money was sitting in a money market fund, which is basically cash. I mean, it's atrocious. So what we always do is we try to get a copy of the statement, look at just how it's invested, which usually is not, and then either see if the client can get an advisor or refer them to an advisor that's not at the bank to shift it so they can get them proper advice. Because if you set up the RDSP and over a 20-year period, you contribute $1,500 a year, like the kid's 18, right? You contribute $1,500 a year for 20 years. The government puts in 90, that's 120. But if that money was invested at 5%, which is reasonable, at the end of the 20 years, it's $200,000. And then you let it sit there, invested at 5 points. Well, obviously 5% of 200,000 is 10,000 a year. So over the next decade, it turns into 300,000. And if it's not invested, it doesn't. Anyway, I'm really on a rant roll here.
Somebody was asking if you can suggest any good financial advisors that they can connect with.
Yeah, we have people all over the province that basically we've educated, and they serve clients within a 2 to 3 hour driving radius. So yes. So
should they call you, or can you tell us now?
Well, no, I can't name the names, but.
Oh, okay. So they should get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's about it. We've done well, I think. It's 8:15. We've got 24 people still here.
Yes.
That's pretty good. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to close things off. I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank you, Lillian.
Well, yes, thank you once again. And we hope we'll have you again next year. And yeah.
Good show. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening, everyone. All right.
I got one more.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a lot of information, and I know for some of our families, or a lot of our families, we have kids that are, you know, really non-functional. And we're so overwhelmed with so many
Right.
things that sometimes this gets put on the back burner. But like I was saying to one of my son's nurses that, you know, every year we do this seminar, it's a reminder to me to have a look at my son's RDSP. It's like, what is happening with that RDSP? Because I barely look at it, right? So
Sure. You're kind of busy.
yeah. It's a good reminder. So I think for families too, like you just need to kind of get into that habit of learning about it and what you can do, and then like setting up a Henson trust or a power of attorney at some point, and just getting all that information. We may not need it right now, but at least the seed has been planted, you know, and I think that's the main thing.
It's often the case that people come to me 10 years later with the material that they've received, and now they're ready.
Right. Yeah. Just planting the seed.
Yeah,
and
right.
yeah, when they're ready, they come. Yeah. So very true. Very true. Well, thank you so much. I guess they have, Karen posted the email. So if there's any questions, they'll either get in touch with you or they'll ask me and I'll pass it on to you.
Okay.
Okay, great.
We'll tidy up the Zoom recording and send it on.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Okay, you too. Have a great evening. Bye.